light, sound, body, performing arts. We have an array of synesthetic treats for you at the intersection of practice and theory. So I think we'll be raising lots of conceptual and really practical, meaty questions. It's slightly different to the programme. I'm afraid that Suzita is not with us, so no longer the rupture and establishment of chiasmatic space and corporeal spatiality. So we will move swiftly on to lighting the lit, luminosity as protagonist in mediated performance, which is a paper by Natalie Rowland. Natalie is doing her PhD on dance and digital choreography and teaches at Chichester.
The liquid crystal display, LCD, has become a part of everyday life for most of us. And over the past decade, developments in mobile technologies, the internet and Wi-Fi have meant we spend more time looking into screens. Through these developments, our relationship to light has fundamentally changed. A far greater proportion of the light our eyes receive is now directly from a light source. We look into light rather than use indirect light to allow us to see. Elizabeth Gross posits that perhaps the most striking transformation effected by these technologies, the chip and the screen, is the change in our perceptions of materiality, space, and information. Gross focuses mainly on the prevalence, availability, and range of information and communication options now presented to us, and the ways that these have impacted on our relationships and perceptions. I'm aiming to approach the changes in our relationship to light affected by the chip and screen, and the ways that this too changes our perceptions of space and information. The focus is on what I will call digital light, light that is either generated by the use of semiconductors rather than traditional light bulbs, such as the LED, or light that hosts or projects content, as seen in mobile phone displays and data projectors. Lighting designer Richard Cadena acknowledges that digital lighting is different to other lighting tools available to the designer. However, he finds it hard to articulate exactly where the difference lies. He asks, is it the content, the light engine, or the control mechanism? To an extent, it's all of the above, and there are several factors that have led my research to single out digital lighting as a new voice in performance practice. Key aspects of the physical behaviour of digital light have presented new opportunities for artists and technologists in the application of these fixtures. LED fixtures, for example, are cool to the touch, offering potential for closer proximity and integration into scenic and costume design. For lighting designers, limitation in the throw of LED directly impacts positioning and purpose. The complexities of the control mechanisms for digital lighting mean that new language is used in their use. Concepts and terminology from graphic design and computer sciences, such as pixels, refresh rates, and content, are now in the lighting designer's domain. Yet despite these fundamental differences that working with digital light brings, lighting designers, directors, and artists continue to approach digital light and apply it in the illuminate, shape, and shadow approach of 20th century scenography. A very common issue when working with projection in performance involves the ambient light required for the live work negatively impacting the rendering of the projected image. We've got the lights turned out in here. When using a live camera feed to projector, this is made further complex since the live action must be well lit in order to be captured by the camera and projected. And this led me to consider the lighting lit. The lighting lit echoes Susan Cazel's discussion of Merleau-Ponty's relation of reversibility, the seeing seen and dancing danced, existing in the dichotomy of an action which also becomes a new object in its execution. Throughout my research to date, this notion recurs with respect to digital light. In the example of the live camera feed to projector, the lighting, the projection, cannot exist without the lit, the visible performers, and the lighting must surrender to the lit. In examining digital light through this lens, the difference between generic and digital light becomes clearer. Projection is lighting. It illuminates, it has beams, it has texture, it travels. It is also the 2D lit surface or object of content. An LED parcan is lighting. Again, it exhibits properties of the action of illuminating, but it is also a lit object. And it's often positioned to be viewed in its own right. And this is an example from lighting designer Andy Watson. A common practice of lighting with LED fixtures is to use them as what's termed eye candy. Lighting that is to be viewed, to be attractive to the eye, to distract, and perform as an object itself. Digital lighting frequently exhibits itself as an object through the process of its action. The duality of digital light is what sets it apart from generic theatre lighting. As Cazell states, this dynamic helps rework the relation between bodies and media technologies by overturning the suggestion that the digital image is merely a visual representation of the world. Through an understanding of the behaviour elicited by this duality, the digital light can tell us more about materiality, space, and information. Could the experience of digital light and a methodology for working with it potentially expand scenography and provide theatre makers with a new medium with which to access the window of the virtual? The virtually lived areas of our lives are frequently inhabited in light, in phones, in tablets, in screens. In a related reversal, could we use this light as a window establishing a link between these spaces and the embodied reality of performance? Emerging Never Arriving was a collaborative choreographic project. PhD researcher Alan Duffield from the Theatre and Drama Department of Royal Holloway College worked with 6 dancers over a 2-month period, during which I was invited to workshop a technological element. Following the workshop, a series of solos and duets were developed, and a selection of phrases were then interrogated further with the addition of camera and portable lighting. I asked the dancers to highlight one part of their body or movement by presenting it close up to the feed camera. The resulting images were projected behind the performer across the remaining group, and this first sequence produced an intense and intricate visual discussion of notions of foreground and background, in frame and out of field. The lighting producing a lit space, a window of virtual space, making more clear to us the real in front of us. And this caused me to consider relationships between notions of the digital, analog, and virtual. Brian Masumi writes that the body sensor of change is a transducer of the virtual. And he posits that sensation, always on arrival a transformative feeling of the outside, a feeling of thought, is the being of analog. It is matter in analog mode. This is the analog, in a sense, close to the technical meaning, as continuously variable impulse or momentum that can cross from one qualitatively different medium into another. End quote. The close relationship between the analog of transformed and transduced sensations and the virtual suggests strongly that there will exist such procedural links between the digital and sensation. The virtuality of the content of digital lighting insists that there is the potential for change and transformation in the movement and the empirical experience of such lighting. Masumi then challenges himself by saying that nothing is more destructive for the virtual than the digital. He asserts the importance of the difference between the virtual and the digital in order to address the common misconception that they are the same. And while I can see Masumi's point, I would say that the digital does belong to the virtual in that it belongs to analog, experience, and haptic. Digital processes must be transduced through analog processes in order to be experienced. The virtual concerns the fleeting, transitions. You need only consider the notion of refresh rates and the moving image to see that the digital realm relies on the virtual in order to exist. No sooner than an image is sent or created, it is resent, re-rendered, looped back upon itself. In order to create movement, the digital partners with the virtual. The codification of content and light that defines digital light results in a relationship with the virtual, and both of these produce an analog experience of light. However, this light differs from the incandescent light in the relationships in its creation, relationships to frame, to content, and code. But are there physical differences too? Why do some people say that LED light and projection feels different? There may be something to do with the haptic here in the sense of a synesthesia proper to vision, a touch as only the eyes can touch. and these are properties that I want to explore in future research. A further example of how changes in the relationship alter the language and experience of digital light can be demonstrated through a second sequence from Emerging Never Arriving. In this second sequence, dancers were asked to reprise their solos from earlier in the piece, but this time to hold a battery-powered LED light and highlight parts of their movement. The dancer was followed by another holding a camera. These instructions are just 2 points. Firstly, the need to be able to illuminate enough for the camera to pick up, but secondly, to explore a non-traditional lighting technique. And while the first camera focus sequence provided content for digital light as large-scale projection, the second sequence introduced a diode-generated light source with no mediatized content. Sequence 1 demonstrated the way that digital light and the context of its content can create new spaces and visual relationships on the stage. Sequence 2 returns us to the notion that digital light can have a different voice to generic lighting. In reworking the relationship between the body and technology, this sequence saw digital light take the role of protagonist in the visual dialogue. In illuminating a particular part of the body or movement, the LED fixture became a lens, directing and drawing focus in the live space and for the camera. The frame created by the LED isolated and redefined the body, showing us the same movement but in a new way, touched by, altered by the digital light. The movement of the light, directed by the dancer, also created a new set of movement on the stage as the light shifted across the space, throwing dynamic shadows and altering those existing. Masumi proposes that tracing the pathway of movement opens up opportunities to retrace, to take a retrospective journey along the trajectory, and that this can be a retroduction, a production by feedback of new movements. Using this notion as a methodology, could retracing the pathways of digital light reveal to us the nature of its movement and notions of effect on performance? The second technology sequence in Emerging Never Arriving offers a practical exploration of a possible retroduction of lighting. A retrospective journey along the movement traced by the camera, the LED lighting, and projection creates a feedback loop presenting to the viewer a new set of movement and dynamics in a space and frame that communicate with a different vocabulary to the live performance. The camera allows us to view the frame created by the light as the camera doesn't compensate for the intense contrast of the LED like our eyes do. And this feedback presents the new frame alongside the existing diffuse frame of the light in the foreground. But how does this retroduction allow us to examine movement? What does it offer us? Responses from the dancers provide some indications of the effect of the digital lighting vocabulary. The reframed movement shows us every shape and shadow that would not ordinarily be seen. The retroduction shows every fold, every shift, every glance and change in velocity. The detail is not only limited to the projection space. LED light also provides a highlighted or framed view in the live foreground. Much of the movement and dynamics is presented here in the contrast of moving light and shadow. In LED lighting, where the light is both lighting and a lit object, the feedback loop is complex, as is its relationship with the movement, objects, and space. The retroduction of this movement involves the movement or shift of the gaze, as well as the source movement from the content. It separates and isolates the focus frame and highlights changes in speed and time. The question has to be asked, couldn't this have been achieved with an incandescent light? In theory, yes, the basic circumstances of a dancer moving with a light could have been created in incandescent light. While an ordinary light bulb would be too delicate to move around, a halogen torch could have been used. However, this returns us to the discussion of what it is that defines digital light and sets it apart. If a torch were used, the light emitted would have had different physical properties, both in the way that the light itself behaves and is seen, but also in the suggestive or semiotic movement, semiotic language that it portrays. In theatre lighting, lights that are used on the stage within the action are usually representative of a naturalistic or utilitarian use. Referred to as practicals, these lights appear as or suggest their real-world use. For example, a table lamp or a street light. They imply context or purpose and often speak directly to the narrative or the atmosphere of the performance. Digital light, I would suggest, still retains its own signature. The means by which the light is generated, be it by diodes or manipulation of polarizing lenses and so forth, produces an ethereal quality to the light. Screens bathe us in a bluish hue, tinting our skin and stimulating our eyes and brain. LEDs scatter light and create shadows in a very different way to an incandescent lamp. They are subtle in their movement, sometimes indistinguishable in their reach. The shadowing created by LED is frequently multiple with lower contrast, suggesting ghostly figures or abstract shapes in movement. Ultimately, then, the difference between digital light and that of traditional or incandescent sources is the way that we work with it. As a technician and designer, I interface with digital light at a more complex level than I do with traditional lighting, where I usually just deal with angles and levels of intensity. As performers and directors, digital light provides you with content and information, both on a cognitive and experiential level. Digital light is frequently positioned where traditional light is not, and this forced new presence requires acknowledgement. If the differences and challenges that digital lighting presents to us are so deeply rooted in our relationships and physical responses, surely it then follows that this lighting is a different voice on the stage. Digital light is a protagonist on the stage. It alters situations and it creates new ones. It can lead the action and it can direct the audience to new understanding and experiences. Our challenge now becomes how to work with this and how to understand and respond to our relationships with it. Thank you very much.
I'm not going to talk too much. Basically, I want to throw this idea of illusion and magic in performing electronic music. The idea is how you treat technology-oriented performances as a magic show. And I will be focusing on performances where the performer on stage controls the technology. And that includes sensors, controllers, cameras, and different aspects of the creative process. As a part of this presentation, I was going to perform a piece which the paper came out from the composition, but unfortunately, I will not do that. But I've got a video that I can show at the end. So first, I'm going to discuss how's it going? Yeah. So first, I'm going to discuss how technology often creates a barrier between the performer and the audience. And the main focus would be sound-oriented, but I'm sure many of you can find many similarities in other performances. I will introduce the idea of approaching the performance like a magic show. And then I will discuss my composition and how my process reflects on this idea of magic in a sense of appreciating the piece. Okay, since this is not a music conference, I thought it would be a good idea to introduce some basic terminology. So we got the first thing is acousmatic music. You can find acousmatic music is an interchangeable term. So you can find it as electroacoustic music or tape music. And is a type of composition that does not require a performer on stage. So all the composition, the creation of the piece takes place in a studio. The performance is provided through the loudspeaker. So very often, to make it more interesting, there is a performer not on stage that is responsible how the sound that's been created in the studio is distributed in the room. So if you have 6 or 8 loudspeakers, or even you find instances that you can find way more, many more speakers. So the person distributes the sound live. So what is important here is the way acousmatic music works in a sense. So it basically removes the stage performer and all the performance ritual that is happening in a standard or traditional composition. And by doing that, it suggests to the audience to frees the audience basically from the history of performance and allows them to experience sound as it is without any additional influence or other things that can be included. So without the performer on stage, the audience is able to create its own abstract representation of sound and the composition. So next we got instrumental music, which is very different from acousmatic music, and I'm sure everybody is familiar with. So the production of sound, in contrast with acousmatic music, takes place on stage with a physical act of the performer performing the instrument. So there is a physical effort from the performer in creating the sound that is being heard to the audience. So all the gestures of the performers are very important to the composition as well. So, and I find quite often myself when I attend a piano performance, I always sit at the place where I can see the hands of the performer because it simply makes it more interesting. I can see how he performs the piece. So another important observation is that the audience got a habit of this stage performer and the performer itself. And throughout the history of music performance, the audience expects the audiovisual correlation or reference. So if you've got a performer on stage, then you assume that he's going to perform a piece, physically perform a piece in that sense. So this habit relationship, which I'm not going to discuss very long, it's not only with our music performance history, but we have it on our everyday life. And I've got a small example which I'm going to show later on. So I'm going to move on, because I think I've mixed it up. So I'm going to move on live electronics music. It's a term that I don't like very much, because it doesn't say anything about it. But it's a term that has been used very often, and many times it does not reflect the actual performance. Live electronics can be simply describe a combination of acousmatic music and instrumental music. So live electronics requires a human performer on stage that is able to manipulate and control the sounding outcome of the piece through sensors, controllers, and other digital devices. So the difference between acousmatic and live electronics is the role of the performer on stage. The technology erases the labor of production of sound, and it makes it difficult for the majority of listeners to engage and appreciate this kind of music. So the performer brings together the whole history of stage performance, and with the technology involved and the ability to produce sounds without any effort, it's kind of an unnatural experience for the audience. So, for example, I can play something very loud with just moving a finger on or just basically pressing the space bar on my computer. But for an instrumentalist to do that, he needs to put some effort, and that this physical effort, it's transmitted to the audience. So, in a sense, the audience is expecting the performer to perform and communicate and articulate sound as a part of the performance ritual. So, as I said before, when a performer, through the use of technology, makes effortless performances without physically engaging with the sound, it's very difficult for the audience to have this abstract representation that otherwise allows the audience to create and understand the music. So I've got a small video that I've created yesterday to show this habit relationship and how we take things for granted. It's a small, not experiment, a video where I removed, the first one is I'm clapping my hands. So when I clap my hands, through this habit relationship that you experience as a human being and in nature, you expect the movement and sound to be in one. So it's not separated. So when I clap my hands, you see me clapping my hands and here as well. So I've got the video here. Okay. Which doesn't look like it's a video.
I don't think it will be running on the presentation.
Okay, let's don't worry. Okay. So what I've done basically, I've recorded myself clapping my hands, and then I've replaced the sound 3 seconds later. So you get the experience that you get is kind of unnatural because you see the physical action of clapping my hands, but you hear the sound coming out 3 seconds later. And this is very often, when performing with electronics, it's very crucial to have this relationship with the visual and the physical act of the performer, especially in live electronics. So if I press play, for example, and it takes 3 seconds to come up, then you lose this connectivity between the action and the sound, and everything falls down, basically. Going in another example. How many of you heard of laptop performances? So you got an idea how laptop performance works. So you got a person on stage behind the laptop, and it's often described as you don't know if that person is doing something or is he just checking his emails. And this is because when you got a person on stage, you expect somehow a physical connection with the sound, and somebody sitting like this behind the laptop, it's not very physical and not very engaging, even though the sound is very interesting, but it doesn't reflect both. And what I was going to say further on to this is that we don't have only the habit of the performer on stage, but also the space as a concert hall. So when you place a performer in a concert hall with a laptop, it's very difficult to do the connection because you got the habit of a concert hall is a concert hall. But when you place the laptop performer in a bar, then everything is more nicer and it's less intrusive, let's say. So what magic has to do with all this? So I thought to include the magician or musician as a term that goes together. A bit of history. Magic comes from Persian and Greek origins, and it was recorded in text 5th and 4th century BC. And you got terms like crafty, begging priest, and tricks of the magician. So a few definitions about magic, which is very interesting to see the relationship of magic and music in a sense. So being beautiful and delightful in a way that seems remote from daily life, and you can say this for every digital technologies, they're removed from daily life. Making something appear to be happen that is actually isn't. Mysterious and supernatural forces. So it got very similarities with what's happening in the digital domain and how it's both reflected. So I'm going to conclude the first part of the presentation before going in and describing the piece. So the idea is that the technology should support the piece in a creative way. And because we got technologies that are evolving in an everyday basis, we should bring somehow a common ground to the audience that the audience can relate to it. So if you imagine a magician, yeah, he will first show you the cards. So he will say, okay, this is real cards. This is not, any random cards. It's a cards from 0 to 52 cards. So you've got a base ground that the performer can then create the magic and find the card that you choose. So in a sense, with performances, I think we should introduce to the audience some kind of a base ground and not give them the technology as it is, because it doesn't make too much sense for them, especially if they've got a broad background. So just quickly going to talk about my piece. So what I've done is basically I've created a system which I've got here. I've created a glove, as everybody else. So pressure sensors on the glove. So when I press the sensor, I got the vibrating motors. So it vibrates. The more I press, the more it vibrates. Different vibrators, vibrating motors, got different frequencies, so different sounds. So I've placed the motors inside the strings of the piano, and I've recorded the sound. I took the sound live, and I've processed the sound through my computer. And I got an iPad as well. I'm using an iPad as well, where I control live different audio processings with my left hand. And the thing is, the trick is that because I'm using only my right hand, yeah, so I will show you, you will see in the video later. Because I'm using only my right hand and my right hand moves on the piano, nobody watches the left hand. So nobody knows that I'm using an iPad or I'm doing extra things. So everybody thinks it's a part of the system. So I think I should stop talking. And this is kind of a quick layout how it's all connected. But I think it's much interesting to look at the video. And another thing is that I take my time to put the glove on, so I'm not in a hurry, and this is also kind of introducing the audience that I'm actually wearing a glove and I'm going to use it. That's another way of showing that I'm not going to play any keys on the piano. And also the theatricality of it, going from all the way to the piano, which is makes no sense, it's a pressure sensor. I'm going to move it a bit forward to see kind of the development, how it works. That's where the effects comes in, and and goes on and fusion. Yeah. So I hope to introduce you to this idea of bringing the theatricality with performing with technology is an essential part, and being thinking as a magician, it will help the audience to get a sense of what you are doing. Thank you.
had I known that I would have been in this session when I wrote my presentation this morning, I would have maybe written a slightly different presentation. But as it is, you're stuck with this one, I'm afraid. So I'm going to start by just showing you a quick video that I hope summarises a bit of the project. So let's hope that this will actually work. Do we have any sound?
Yes, the idea is to assemble a sound archive showing just how Leicester has changed over the past 50 years.
For the project which the here of our closest relative John Hess, who has even contributed some historic sounds of his own.
What do you reckon that is? So how well do you recognise everyday sounds from the recent past?
It's a football rattle.
Sounds like sellotape or something.
I'll tell you what it is.
Oh, the old liquor job. Oh, I remember them. Blimey, you're going back a few years now, aren't you?
Composer Dr. Andrew Hill and Colin Hyde of the East Midlands Oral History Archive want to capture the disappearing sounds of this city.
Yeah, next door to the old bus depot was one of Leicester's.
Part of Leicester with its theatres and bars, industries and trade, and the unique sounds with them as manufacturing declined. We have to go out and about and find the few remaining factories that still exist in Leicester. They're out there, we're just going to find them. Listen closely and you can hear the industrial sound of a changing city. This factory makes socks. There used to be dozens of similar factories like it across Leicester. Yes, you can look at photographs and you can look at old maps, and that gives you some way of getting into the past. But through sound, we believe that people can really imagine
their mobile phones or any other devices they have to record current sounds, and that can be in the home, it can be in the street, or it can be in the workplace as well.
the archive will be used as an audio tourist guide for future historians and the public. The race is now on to capture those sounds from the past before they simply fade away. John Hurst, BBC East Midlands Today, Leicester.
Okay, fabulous. So I showed you that. Hopefully it gives you an introduction, and I also wanted to show off my trousers, which have been quite popular. So as explained in this short video, the idea of the project is to encourage people to engage in with history in alternative ways, and to kind of try and explore. I'll just try and get rid of this thing. To explore and give people different ways of getting into the past, really. And so my project is just one of various different strands to the overall grant. There are people creating poetry inspired by oral histories of the location, and there are people making dance performances in response to space and location. And so my project is to create a sound map of the area. So what I'm doing is I'm looking at going around the area and trying to work with Colin, who's the historian, to research what was going on in the past. So obviously this area is now kind of gentrified in the sense that it's full of bars and coffee shops, and almost all of the past that was there, all of the past human activity that was going on there has been completely erased by this new wave of development. So on one hand, there's this kind of historical imperative where the historians are very keen to be to construct something, but I'm also keen to expand people's awareness of sound and to introduce them to the idea of listening and what a vital role that sound plays in the way that we interact and integrate with our environments. So this is an old map from the 50s, I think, of the area. And so you can see there's lots of terraced housing around here. Some of these main buildings still exist, so there's a large Odeon cinema here. We were stood here. That photograph was taken from just here, looking up this way. And so the road layout in this area has remained the same, but you can see that in this more recent image, which I think is from the 80s, that all of these terraced houses have been completely obliterated. So, and they've been replaced by these kind of larger industrial centres, which themselves have now been closed down and converted into apartments. So my plan is to create various levels of interactivity for the users, to have larger, more ambient soundscapes for certain areas, and to go right down and have very specific kind of point source sounds to really draw people through the space and to encourage them to explore and to connect with the different activities that are going on. Now, I suppose a lot of people who work with soundscapes are very interested in nature sounds. So often you'll have people going out and recording bird song and the beauty of the pristine environment. But to me, I'm not really so interested in that. What I'm interested in are the human sounds, the way that we interact with the world, because that's the world that we actually inhabit. And so with this, I'm more interested in, as I say, the human aspect. So there might be some bird song here in the church, but then there'll also be kind of sermons coming from the church and the sounds of the factories and other activities. So one of the main questions that I've had to contend with is this idea of authenticity. Obviously, when you're creating something that's historical, people want to be assured that there is some authentic realism to what it is that you're doing. But the truth of the matter is actually that we are already in a or in a mediated world. So as soon as we record a sound, we abstract it from its natural context. So the removing a sound and playing it back through a loudspeaker is automatically false. There's no way that me recording those sock machines when represented could ever be true. So I have kind of accepting this, it frees us a little bit from the historical limitations and allows us to accept and to admit from the very start that we're constructing an augmented reality. So we're not reconstructing an absolute reconstruction. We are admittedly creating a sort of dramatic, mimetic discourse that can encourage people to engage with the environment in a new way. So in a sense, the user becomes the performer in this. They move through the space and they construct their own narrative soundscape journey through it. And of course, there will be sounds that flood in from the outside as well, which I know that was mentioned yesterday in some of the other, maybe not yesterday, the day before, in some of the other sound mapping projects. So I wanted to play a couple of sounds that I went and recorded the other day. And it's really been a really great experience for me, actually, as well, to go out and to discover all these historical sounds and to learn about a very human history. So I'm just going to put these on low in the background, I think, if I can turn this down. So as I said, when I'm kind of constructing this sound map, I'm looking at creating a hyper-real environment because in truth, actually, nobody really wants to listen to the sound of machinery. probably. It's probably not very interesting to have a factory that's making sounds. So I have to highlight the interesting sounds that are in a space and to draw people's attention to it. And it's the same not only with the historic sounds, but also with the modern sounds as well, because I'm trying to, as I mentioned at the beginning, I'm trying to encourage people to listen in a new way and to engage with the sounds around us today. So there are some fantastic sounds in the space that I'm also creating. So in terms of the realization when we bring things together, I'm hoping that the application hasn't actually been built yet. So as I said, it's got a minimal visual interface for a transparent user experience, and it's so minimal at the moment that it doesn't even exist. So that's going to be, I'm as interested as you are to find out what it actually looks like, but I'm very keen that people aren't stuck looking at a screen while they walk around. I want them to be have their phone in their pocket and to be walking around and listening and exploring the space that they're in. We're probably going to have two soundscapes, so a more modern one that draws, as I mentioned, draws attention to various aspects that are going on today, and this historical one. But I think what I really want to do is to create echoes between both of them so that there is an acknowledgement of the past, even if you are in the present soundscape, to try and encourage people to shift between those. But it's going to be a challenge to see how, I think we're going to only see how that works in practice, because I'm very aware of overloading people with too much information. And of course, my final and key aim is to encourage people to attend to the listening environment and to increase their oral awareness, I suppose. So as you saw in the video, we went to the sock factory to collect some sounds, and also these sounds that are playing now are from the Leicester Transport Heritage Trust. There was a bus depot right in the area, so I got the excuse to go out and record some buses. And for me, actually, it was really incredible how iconic those sounds were, that I remember, even though I wasn't at school that long ago. It really brought back memories to me of travelling on the buses. So I think they must have had some terribly old buses where I went to school. So yeah, it was very visceral for me as an experience. And I'm hoping that that will be the same for the users, people that do come along and use the app. So I'm afraid that that's the end of my presentation. I don't know whether I'm far below, but that's good. If anyone would like to find out any more about the project, there's a website with a blog that I seem to be the only one who actually updates the blog, but there are lots of posts about me running around Leicestershire recording sounds of old stuff. So, thank you very much.
Thank you, Andrew. That was wonderful. And again, I was getting some really, you talked about immersive memory and also about the sound and this visceral thing. So I'm really interested in how we've talked about the digital and the virtual, but we are talking about embodied human experiences too. That really struck me. I don't know if you'd like to say anything a little about that while I ask the audience to
One thing that really came to my mind when you were talking about your end users with the app. Some of my students worked on a project where they created an installation that linked to sound bites. And what became really, really interesting was when you stepped back and you listened to lots of people in the space listening to different sounds, and this soundscape kind of generator. I wonder whether that might be an intention for people coming together in one particular space and exploring those sounds.
Well, I think if one person uses the app, I'll be pleased. But getting a lot of people together could be a really interesting experience. And I was talking to James and Emma, who were talking about their apps the other day, about this idea of you're constructing an augmented reality, but that also means that people are not totally aware of their actual reality. So for this project, they're wandering around outside, and I hope that no one gets run over, because I'll be in trouble probably. But no, it is really interesting how people will interact with the space, and that's one thing that I actually can't predict really. But I think I do want people to feel that they're very present in the space. And as I say, it's not a completely historic take on it. They're not supposed to be transported back in time or anything. It's supposed to be an augmentation of reality to kind of reflect back. So.
Make a comment?
No, I think it's very, it's very interesting. And I was thinking, if you thought to record, for example, only one road for 24 hours for a year, for example, or at a particular day each month, and then create an archive that the user can go and choose 2014 August, and then go through that road and get an experience of that day, how was the sound basically.
Because one of the other problems is that it changes radically throughout the day, depending whether you're there at 9 a.m. or you're there at 6 p.m. It will be completely different, the soundscape. So we've kind of had to pick one aspect. But one thing that I do want to have on there as well is a button for users so that they can record and upload their own sounds. If they get to a certain area and they hear something great, they can hit the record button and load up. Of course, this makes all the people at the university very nervous because they think people are going to upload Madonna songs or something and they'll get done for copyright. So I don't know whether that will actually happen, but that's what I'd really like, so that it actually becomes an ongoing archival project, I suppose, in that sense.
Right. Do we have any questions from the audience? Hi. Can I ask you to say your name, where you're from, and...
I will. Hello, I'm David McCormick from Winchester University and the Laban Centre. You just mentioned archives just the last moment there, which was what struck me about this idea of collecting lots and lots of sounds. It was just an idea. I wondered whether you'd thought about involving some kind of compositional tools for people to sort of employ these sounds, in sort of music concrete kind of idea, or, sound object idea, so that they can start to become, a LIFT, London International Festival of Theatre, used to have a sort of living archive, which was a collection of materials, non-digital, off performances, not records, but just materials that people could take and rebuild or reimagine and re-employ into something. And it seems to me that it's a wonderful, reliving of history. I mean, are there? I'm not a musician myself. I wonder if there are simple compositional tools that you could start to play with these sounds in a mode of creation of music.
No, there certainly are lots of tools, and it's funny that you mentioned that, because that's one of the things that we discussed at the very beginning of the project. Well, I was basically hired by Leicester University, or the University of Leicester, I'll get in trouble if I say it wrong, as a sound artist. So they basically said to me, we want you to do something with sound. We don't care what it is. We just want you to engage with the past area and to construct it. So one of the options was to compose a piece that was made of the sounds there. But then I decided that actually I wanted it to be a more of immersive experience that people could create themselves. And we did discuss the idea of creating a library of sound files that could then be taken and to run a couple of audience engagement workshops so that people could create their own mix, their own remix of the space. But in a sense, that's kind of what they're doing anyway. When they walk through the space, they're creating their own mix of these different sounds. So I have been in discussion with them about the possibility of creating a way of drawing a pathway on the map. So they then record this trajectory and they can maybe edit that. And so even without being in the space, you can perform the sounds and to use that, because I think that offers lots of really interesting possibilities. And then people could maybe upload their trajectory. So this was my journey through the space, what's yours? And see what other people discover, different things. So.
Sorry, some lovely work by, do you know an artist called Charlotte Spencer? She's designs or choreographed audio walks
which may be something that really interests you, because they're pre-recorded compositions of found sound, but they are then available to an audience to navigate in whatever location point they start from, essentially. So those associations of sort of the visual, the oral, and the geographical happen at the will of the if you like, the agent, the participant. They're neither audience, well, they're both audience and performer. So maybe there's something quite lovely in.
I think that sounds really interesting. Let's have a chat about
Yeah.
that. I also really love those pataphysical tours, where you navigate Paris using a map of New York or something. And I really love that idea that you kind of are, discovering new things by, using the wrong map.
Dr. Stephen Kennedy, also from Creative Professions and Digital Arts at the University of Greenwich.
I didn't get to introduce myself. That was I've got a couple of questions, and I'll hold back on the second one. The first one is specifically, I think, for Natalie, but I think the other two, you may want to respond as well. I'm pretty sure, Natalie, I agree with you on this point, and I'm trying just to track back, remember what you were saying. I think at some point you said, or you put one of the quotes up, that you said that the digital images was something more than a representation. And then you went on to refer to Masumi and his interpretation of the virtual. And then you kind of contradicted him a bit and jumped in a bit. I just wanted to clear in my mind what it was that's more, there's something more than representation in the digital image that isn't what Masumi was calling the virtual. You yourself have a slightly different take on that. So if you could elaborate on that a little bit.
Yeah, what I've certainly seen a lot of is people using projection and LED screens in a very literal, very pictorial way. And we see it all the time on television, these screens pop up like unwanted banner ads, and I think that that's a very, very naive and very limited use of that technology. I saw an installation done by a lighting manufacturer who had a particularly creative technician who got a load of the tubes that create those LED screens, but he created a three-dimensional object with them and pixel mapped within 3 dimensions. So the light became this three-dimensional shifting, moving entity, if you like, rather than just an image, something that's giving you concrete information. From an experiential and a sensory point of view, I just feel that there is so much more to be explored there, rather than just constantly using this type of lighting as a screen. I don't know if that answered your question at all.
But you see that as... No, that perfectly answers, and that's I agree absolutely that there is something so much more than just flat static representations when we start to think about digital images. But you seem to have a problem with Masumi's theorizing of the idea, the word virtual. I just wondered how those two things fitted together.
Yeah, I think I'm still piecing things like that together for myself at the moment, and I think what concerns me about Masumi's writing is that he's very, okay, the digital is bad for the virtual, and digital is over here and virtual is over there, and there's no relationship between them, and I disagree with that. I think the two have to be linked in order for them to exist.
Perfectly, because that's and I absolutely do agree with you, and I thought I did, so thank you.
Thank you. Can you identify?
Oh, I'm Sarah, and I'm an ex-dancer in this question. I think you have to see lighting for dance as totally different, because in lighting for theatre and broadcast and all that, we're lighting people to see, and we don't in dance. We don't have to in dance. We see it as different, don't we? We see it as a very different format. You don't have to play those games.
Why only in dance? I think that's one of my...
Why only in dance?
Because we don't have to speak. I don't know. He wants to say something.
Oh, yeah, straight away?
Yeah.
It's a different question, though.
Oh, I thought you were going to answer that one.
It's a flow. It's good.
It's a flow.
We've got to create a flow going,
Okay.
and I'll take the mic back.
Okay, Dr. Olutoyo from the University of Winchester. A question for all three, really. I mean, just in light of this forced dichotomy between virtual and digital, I have a slight problem with the notion of embodiment and virtual, or light, sound, and body. And with regards to your pieces, what would you say, and how would you constitute the embodiment of that? Because you talked quite a lot about presence, wanting people to be immersed in the sound of the space, and you're talking about looking at light in a way which says that it's a thing in itself. And likewise with yourself, with sound, you're saying, okay, get rid of the person, the performer. So what embodiment? I suppose to enlighten embodiment, yeah.
Brilliant. So we'll go across the panel like this. Your work and embodiment.
Yeah, I wasn't exactly saying remove the performer, but basically to have this, not exactly embodiment with the technology, but to have this new relationship between the performer and the technology. We should try and look at it from a different perspective and try to look at it from a more humanistic perspective, if you like. So, yeah, I mean, we know that technology can do weird things and many things that, yeah, we cannot imagine yet. But how, as an artist, you can give this to the audience a different perspective. And I think this is kind of creating a gap between what the audience can see and what the performer can show. And I mean, I'm sure from this conference, there are a lot of exhibitions and performances that I could find this gap between me as the audience and the artist. So, for example, I could go in there are a lot of pieces that if you don't read a whole paragraph of what the artist wants to say, it's kind of very difficult to get it, what's happening with the object, with the art. So I think, yeah, it should be a more humanistic approach in that embodiment, let's say.
Hi. In terms of embodiment, I think there's several different angles and different issues that you can come at from a lighting point of view. For me, it's definitely an area that I want to explore more, because talking to dancers and talking to choreographers and other performers, they all feel that there is something about lighting. There's something about lighting that is more than just a visual thing, and it does the installation at the Barbican at the moment with the projector beams. Have you seen it? That's a very, very tactile way of dealing with light, and I think there's something to be explored there in this kind of tactile way of working with light. Light affects us on a physical scale to an enormous degree. I mean, there's been a lot of studies about the effect of people reading off of screens before they go to bed, and the blue content of the light affecting the melatonin releases in the brain and all those kind of things. So there's definitely physical links, and it's I think we need to explore those more, and I'm very much hoping to do so in my research.
Very exciting.
So I think for me, as I said, it's about this idea of transparency. I think in kind of not letting the technology get in the way. And I think Wagner was the first person who kind of created a pit for his orchestra so that they didn't get in the way of the opera, of the drama. He was kind of creating this total artwork, and he didn't want people to see the musicians because that was, that's the technology, that's how the sound is being created. That's not important to the story. And I think it's the same for my app. I don't want people to be looking at the screen or thinking about the technology that they're using in order to kind of negotiate the space, and kind of seeking to kind of blur those limits, I suppose, a bit like you're kind of delimiting the screen. You're not kind of working just in this frame. You're trying to blur those boundaries and allow people to explore a bit more. I don't know whether that answers your question or...
It does. I think, I suppose there is, and this is probably not a question, this is a rhetorical question, and something maybe to sort of be discussed, but there's something about archetypes or strands of human behavior that we embody, that we recognize. We might want to explode those particular archetypes, those patterns, those paradigms, and the beauty of art is how when we make something from our lives and it resonates and hits a symbol in that archetypal realm, and I'm thinking of Jung in this particular context, that resonates. And it's not a bit like what you're saying there, the technology is invisible then, and Wagner's right, he wanted to extract these kind of archetypes to stir the soul of his audience in an attempt to transform them using a kind of metaphysical magic of art and human experience. And I think that, I suppose, when I talk about embodiment, there is that these layers of the body, from the physical, the social, the emotional, the psychological, and how they interface. So that's really like that. But, it's kind of answered. So.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Andrew, I think you've set a new hair running as soon as you mentioned Wagner. And you know how he was always demanding the impossible, and he could only achieve some of that by building his own opera house, which you mentioned at Bayreuth. And of course, productions of Wagner now still are struggling with ever realizing what was in his mind. It hasn't actually become easier, but all the techniques that are being discussed at this conference, and particularly in this room, would actually begin to make the task more possible. So I'm just throwing a gauntlet here, but how do you think Wagner would react to the various comments that and the technologies that have been put forward?
We'll begin with Andrew, and then everyone can step into Wagner's shoes and see how they're feeling about the total work of art.
Well, I think that...
You raised it, so you are...
I know, it's my fault, isn't it? Sorry. I think that obviously the one great thing about technology is that it allows us to deal with a whole range of different media in a more plastic way today. I mean, we can get hold of light, and we can use the technology that we've got to really kind of form it and mold it. I mean, thinking of audiovisual composition, which we were talking about earlier, and which I'm also involved with, the earliest experiments, they were creating light organs. So you could only have this kind of mechanical linkage between a sound, a pitch, and a certain color. But now we can kind of go offline and create these offline relationships with recorded media that allow us to kind of explore much greater, deeper kind of, I don't know, kind of linkages between media. And I suppose that, that's the whole reason for inventing technology, is to kind of allow us to create new things. And the reason that the piano was invented and that the violin was invented was to kind of explore and have a greater control over these kind of media.
Thank you all. give Natalie and Thomas the opportunity
One of the first people I researched when I started picking around at lighting was a guy called Appia who worked with Wagner. He was a scenographer of the time, and he was one of the very first to sit down and pick apart light and say, well, light does lots of different things. Light is a force on the stage, and he was very, very passionate about marrying the music of Wagner with the light, and it was all to do with the physicality of light and the movement that can be generated through it, and the shape and the shadowing and the depth that can sit alongside the music and enhance the music. And I think I'm completely behind the whole kind of unity of art idea, and I think that the new technologies that are coming along, we just need to find ways of working with the existing disciplines and maintaining that interdisciplinary approach rather than ending up with lots of different categories of computer design and this and that. I think there's a whole lot to be said for us all working together and pulling together different approaches, especially when it comes to theatrical productions.
No, I was going to mention, obviously Wagner is a magician. So he removed the whole orchestra to give you the illusion and to push forward the opera and the whole thing. So in that sense, it's you don't know that the orchestra is out of sight, so it's not in the way, so it's kind of an illusion that what's happening on stage is out of magic, let's say.
I think he'd probably be directing films if you were here today. Thinking about it.
Well, that was a wonderful discussion. There's much more to discuss about the total work of art. I found quite a lot of this controversial, but I'm only chairing, so I'm not going to throw in. The total work of art, magic. We didn't bring up alchemy, archetypes. So over tea, coffee and biscuits, I invite you to carry on the discussion. And could we please thank again our three brilliant presenters.